Kicking us off at number 5, we've got r/no sleep. If creepy stories are your jam, then this is the place to start. Creepypasta fans flock to this subreddit to read and write the next generation of scary online stories. As one of the better known freaky subreddits, No Sleep has over 1.4 million subs. After opening its doors about 10 years ago, it's become the premier destination for creatives and spook seekers alike. As the name implies, it's the classic read till 4 a.m. and then realize it's totally dark and you can't move site. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole of scary stories, this is the place to do it. You read one, and then another, and then another, and you keep going until your brain is 100% composed of scary internet stories. This, contrary to popular belief, is actually healthy. What makes No Sleep a special place for campfire story enthusiasts is the set of rules that make it a wonderful community. It's easy to dampen enthusiasm and discourage active posting if everyone's already crapping all over what's being written. So to keep the "this is so fake" crowd at bay, they have an overarching rule. Everything here is true, even if it's not. This makes for more fruitful discussion, keeps ideas flowing, and allows for more creative collaboration. No Sleep is full of well-known online horror gems like The Limping Woman, Search and Rescue, Mimicry, and more. Enjoy your insomnia. Coming in at number 4, we got r/paranormal. Now, if you've decided that fiction posing as reality isn't quite your speed, you can take a trip to the wild world of the paranormal. Investigators and enthusiasts alike gather here to swap tales of spectral encounters and really dig deep into the stories that others are telling. Unlike on No Sleep, skeptics and the totally reality-centric are encouraged to get to the bottom of each post. Nothing is off limits as long as it's relevant and paranormal related. Here, exorcisms and cursed objects are discussed with photos, videos, and written accounts to back them up. Recently, we talked about a cursed statue that first gained notoriety on r/paranormal, which is a primetime example of the kind of stuff to expect. Ghosts, ghouls, curses, cryptids, you name it. If it doesn't fit into the well-established version of reality that most folks subscribe to, you'll likely find it here. Connections between amateurs and experts are made here too. Folks experiencing their first real scare can come to seek advice on how to deal with it, or potentially on how to resolve any number of freaky happenings. And it's not all problems and solutions though. Some topics brought up on this board are actually unexplainable though, compounding the mystery and creep factor. Videos of objects moving when they really shouldn't, threads of crime scene cleaners experiences, unexplainable security footage, and more await. A very popular, very unnerving category of posts is things kids said. You know, children with knowledge of things that they really can't explain. Past lives, ghost sightings, and more. That's the last thing anyone wants to hear. Portents of doom from innocent youngsters. Hopefully they're not possessed.
Next up at number 3, The Closet. This story comes from Tighty Whitey's 37, which is as the story goes, back in 2002 they were living in an old apartment that had been built back in the year 1900, making it just over 100 years old when they moved in. Now everything in the apartment was great apart from one thing: the bedroom, and in particular the closet in the bedroom, which gave them the unnerving feeling that someone or something was watching them when it was left ajar. So much so that when this particular Reddit user was sleeping, they'd often hear strange gasping noises, and it would seem that they were coming from within the closet. They'd check, nothing there. But for that reason, the closet would always stay closed. A month or so of them staying in the apartment, there was a loud bang on the closet door one night, and our narrator was woken from their sleep. It was pitch black, yet they sensed something that emerged from the closet, standing over them, a pressure holding them down in their bed. And yeah, you could explain this away with sleep paralysis, but the end of this story may just make you think twice. Throughout their stay at the apartment, the encroaching sense of dread from the closet had never quite left, and even their friends would comment on the strange feeling that they felt when in the vicinity of the closet. It got so bad that eventually they had the chance to move to another unit, so they jumped at the opportunity, packed their stuff up, and got the hell out of there. Well, a few years later, the owners were renovating the building when our narrator was walking past the doorway of their old apartment. Curiously, they caught the building manager who was painting in the bedroom and began talking about the strange feeling that they felt whilst living there. Without thinking twice, the building owner explained that the former tenant of the apartment had committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the closet. And not only that, but the original designer of the building, who had also stayed in the same apartment, had also committed suicide. They'd hanged themselves in the exact same closet. Swinging in at number 2, the baby upstairs. And this story comes from Reddit user UrgeHouse666, spooky name bud, who explains an incredibly strange moment during their teenage years. As the tale goes, when they were in high school, their uncle would throw them a couple of bucks every now and then to babysit his kids with their aunt. They lived in a beautiful old 2-story house by the water in a nice area, and the 2 children were around 3 and 6. One day, our narrator was sitting in the den scrolling through their phone when they started to hear a baby crying. Of course, it must be the 3-year-old distressed upstairs, so doing their babysitting duty, they headed to check on them. They called out a couple of times while heading upstairs, to no response. They called for their aunt to see if she was dealing with it. No response again. When they turned to start walking up the stairs, they caught a glimpse outside in the yard. It was their aunt with her 2 children laughing and playing on the grass. They heard the babies cry again, the noise coming from upstairs, and all of the hairs on our narrator's body stood on end, a chill running down their spine. Quietly, they turned around, walked down the stairs, got in their car and drove away. The baby was still crying when they closed the door behind them. A few years later, our narrator was drunk at a family party, and they mustered the courage to tell their uncle the story. He said that him and his wife used to hear the baby too, crying when no one else was around. According to him, the previous owners had a small child that had died of cot death in the same room that the cries were coming from. Spooky stuff. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the attic. And again, another tale of spooky kids in upstairs locations. Sorry, I hope that wasn't a spoiler. This story comes from Reddit user Ghouls, who tells the tale of the time that they'd moved into their new childhood home. You see, their family had managed to snag a deal because previously the house was used as a model home to show off the housing design of the surrounding area. Upstairs, it had this loft area that had 2 stairwells that attached to it on either end, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from up there as it was so open. Anyway, one day our narrator and their 2 friends, a guy and a girl, were hanging out in the loft. It was high school, so teenagers being teenagers, the pair were pretty handsy. They were watching TV all snuggled together on the sofa when our narrator got up to take a leak. When they got back, the 2 of them were on completely different ends of the couch, their faces drained of all colour. Our narrator asked them what was up, and the guy said, "Your little sister is home." Instantly, our narrator's face went white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" the girl asked. You see, our narrator didn't have a little sister, and he asked them what made them think he did. They replied that they'd heard her and then they'd seen her, but for all they knew, no one was in the house. To this day, our narrator's 2 best friends swear that they heard a little girl laugh and run up the stairs, hitting her hand on each step like she was running up on all 4s, like kids do. As it turned out, before it was a model home, a family had lived there, and their young daughter had been playing upstairs in the loft. She'd climbed a railing, slipped and fell to her death, and no one thought to mention that fact when they were flipping the house. No wonder they got such a good deal.
Number 5, hit and run. A hit and run is probably in the top 5 lamest things that can happen to you. Simpsons hit and run, however, fantastic. Someone hits your car and then doesn't have the decency to pull over and check in on what's wrong. Even more frustrating is to know that you'll probably never get to find out who did it unless you have the army of the internet on your side. A Reddit user named Meatheaded had experienced a hit and run, and frustrated and at a loss, turned to Reddit to try and find some answers with what little evidence he had to offer. When he posted a picture of a broken headlight to r/what is this thing, he probably didn't expect as much of a response as he got, as it was kind of an odd question. But some 400 comments later, and Redditors had managed to accurately find the model of the car down to the make, model, and year, and all of this just off of a bit of broken plastic and glass. Meatheaded then took the information and ran it through a database and found a 91 gray Cadillac that had been reported stolen. Meatheaded sent the data over to the traffic crimes unit of his local police department, and were able to corroborate the data to track down the missing car and the suspect. Again, all just on a blurry photo of a broken headlight, which is downright incredible. Not only did they manage to find the car, but they also managed to connect it to a theft, busting 2 crimes with 1 post. Most Reddit posts don't get nearly that lucky. At most, you're getting a few upvotes, not solving a crime. And if you've got a love for scary videos, my friends, let us know. Subscribe to catch more of them every day, twice a day. Let's keep going. Number 4, phone scam. Now, not every crime has to be a grim one. Sometimes it's as simple as helping somebody get out of a scam. In 2019, an anonymous Redditor posted a complaint to the Reddit Bureau of Investigation subreddit complaining that he had been scammed while trying to sell his phone privately. The Redditor had been in a bad situation, in dire straits, needed some quick cash, and was selling off an old phone to someone he'd met on a local listing site like Craigslist. He met the customer, who asked to meet late at night. Not thinking too much of it, the Redditor obliged, only to have his phone swiped quickly, and when he noticed the money he'd been given, he noticed that it was all counterfeit bills. Frustrated and scammed, he was helpless with no idea what to do. A Redditor reached out to the original poster and helped them track the number that he was given to contact the scammer. They searched through and found that it belonged to a 75-year-old man who didn't quite add up. So they did some more digging, and they found that the man who owned the phone number had one relative who happened to share a name with the scammer. Through more digging, the OP and Reddit discovered that the man had been arrested previously and had a suspended driver's license. Kind of amusingly, the original poster went back to the police with all this new information and discovered that the detectives had copied down the numbers of the scammer down completely wrong, so they were never going to be any help at all. 2 days later, they called him into the station to look at a lineup, and they'd found the phone scammer. His grandfather had been paying it off, and the relative he'd been looking into was the scammer's father. The detectives thanked him for his time, and they charged him with criminal fraud with the intent to deceive. The OP got it solved, he got the phone back, and the scammer got charged. And you got to hear about this story in this lovely video. So, win, win, win.
Coming at number 3, we've got Pus Brain. Not two words you really want to see together, right? Well, just listen to this story from user Slappy McSlappenstein. It speaks for itself. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst, but amazingly he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. So take your full dose of antibiotics, people. How are we feeling about this one? A little headache? Checking in on your sinus health? Because that is absolutely bonkers. This dude essentially had to have a brain enema because of the filth built up in his dome. That stuff comes back with a vengeance, like he said, if you're not careful. So listen to your local healthcare worker and finish your antibiotics regimen. Coming in at number 2, we've got the suffocation station. In a lot of creepypasta stories, folks who are left near some dangerous chemical or enclosed space often go mad. You know, self-mutilation, murder, hideous mutations, the works. In this story though, the folks put in an unsafe situation don't end up doing a whole lot of that. They just die, and they die quick. We live in a cruel world, and if the folks running companies aren't careful or tend to cut corners, a lot of bad stuff can happen. Take it from Reddit user Animator Spaminator. I heard this from my grandpa. He used to work in the oil/gas industry. His father actually owned the company. Anyways, they had these huge tanks full of some deadly gas that's heavier than oxygen. Some guy went down to measure the size of the tank, suffocated, and died. Another guy found him at the bottom, wanted to help him, and he went down after him, suffocated, died after falling off the ladder down. Third guy does the same. Eventually, my grandpa finds 3 dead bodies at the bottom of a large tank, all having suffocated on this toxic gas. They have vents in these tanks now, which is good. Yeah, the poor grandpa. Imagine strolling into work and discovering not 1, not 2, but 3 dead bodies. All because of an invisible assailant that robbed the oxygen from their lungs. And finally at number 1, we've got the Outback Backpack Killer. If I was ever to visit Australia, I would be on the lookout for killer animals, bugs, and temperatures. In fact, killer people probably wouldn't even cross my mind. However, as this story shows us, murderous lunatics can be anywhere at any time. User Passometer has this story to tell. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us have done. One of his friends told him that they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed the kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, but afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, the man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. And now this guy has to walk around for the rest of his life with the knowledge that he slept in a death sleeping bag. Definitely the kind of story that ends up as the central focus of a true crime podcast.
In at number 5 we have Grateful Doe. After a fatal car crash in 1995, there was an unknown body found in the wreckage, and this John Doe was wearing a Grateful Dead band tee. People eventually forgot about the case and was deemed unsolvable. The Grateful Doe was an American man who was hitchhiking when he was picked up by 21-year-old Michael Hager, but unfortunately Hager had crashed his van into a tree, and the two men were killed in the accident on June 26, 1995 in Greensville County, Virginia. The unidentified hitchhiker was an American man estimated to be between the ages of 15 to 21 years old. He had brown eyes with long curly brown or dark blonde hair that had been dyed red. There was a star tattoo identified on his upper left arm, and he was found wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt on as well. Investigators had found Grateful Dead tickets in the young man's pocket dating June 24th and 25th. Due to the severity of the lacerations on the unidentified victim's face, mortuary photographs were not released to the public, although a facial reconstruction was later released. In 2012, another facial reconstruction was created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited People. The man who had originally sold the tickets found in Callahan's pocket did not remember the person to whom he had sold them. At least 221 missing people were ruled out as possible identities of the victim. Investigators exhausted all of their resources, questioned everyone they could, and the case eventually went cold, and his body remained nameless until 2015. A woman by the name of Layla Betts, a Redditor and Grateful Dead fan, came across the case and began researching and posting what she had found online. The case soon went viral thanks to Layla, and she was soon contacted by one of the Doe's former roommates, who helped her put together pieces of the puzzle and tried to solve the case. Layla found out that Doe's real name was Jason Callahan, and finally this case was solved after so many years. Coming in at number 4 we have the Hotel Zaza photo. In 2013, Reddit's internet detectives swarmed a subreddit for Houston, Texas, after a user by the username Joe Likes Music posted a mysterious thread asking insiders what the deal was with a bizarre hotel room at Hotel Zaza. Right when you walk in, it's not a welcoming room with the sinister paintings hanging above the concrete floor, what looks like a two-way mirror next to a bed that was chained to the wall, and a portrait of Stanford Financial Group president Jay Como, overlooking the whole room. Joe Likes Music's work colleague had booked room 322 and was supposedly told that that certain room wasn't meant to be booked at all, and I can see why. Rather than just saying, oh, it's just a weird themed room, the internet did what it does best and speculated wildly about the contents of the room. Some commenters thought the room numbers corresponded to the Skull and Bones secret society, while others assumed that the whole thing was a marketing scam. Vice got wind of this story and tracked down someone from the hotel to get these Redditors' questions about this creepy hotel room finally answered. Cryer Coots, the Houston hotel's head of e-marketing, brought light to some unanswered questions about the themed rooms and weird paintings. Coots stated that, like the other themed rooms Zaza pride itself on, the Hard Times room is just a kooky take on yet another theme, jail. Coots also said the Zaza collection started in Dallas, where our first property was built 10 years ago. Our owners and president were really the visionaries and pioneers behind concept suites, so when the Hotel Zaza Houston opened a few years later, they continued with the same conceptual design. Vice had brought up the theories about the odd 322 room, and Coots states the building was built almost 100 years ago, so when Zaza came in they wanted to use the existing structure. They didn't want to manipulate anything for design purposes. As a result, there are a couple of rooms throughout the property that are more compact. For 322, the idea was just to take a fun, unique spin on a jailhouse experience. So it has an exposed brick wall and a bed hanging from the wall with chains. It's just a fun way to decorate a small space. So there you have it, another mystery solved by Reddit users and internet sleuths.
Number 3 on this list is the glitch in the Matrix. The glitch in the Matrix subreddit is a subreddit where people share extensive stories about how we could potentially be living in a simulation and how they have witnessed a glitch. These things can get very weird, and if you believe the stories that are here, then they truly make you question your actual existence. We're talking about time loops that people get stuck in, things glitching positions, people teleporting to different places, things going very wrong that defy the laws of physics and are very reminiscent to that of a video game just totally glitching. Let's read off one of these glitches to give you guys an understanding of what I mean. This one comes in from Ragnar, and they say, alright, so this is a very
minor glitch, but it's messing with my head, so here you go. The other day I had my younger sister and 2 nieces over for dinner. While eating, I took a picture of us all and then took another picture maybe an hour later while sitting in the living room having dessert. Now on the first picture, my sister's shirt is very clearly a peach pink color, but on the second picture, it's a dark mint green / turquoise color. Now I confirmed with everyone that she did not switch shirts, and you can clearly see that it's the same one / cut. I thought maybe the phone camera was off or there was a filter causing it, but everyone else's clothes look the same, so that doesn't make any sense. None of us have any idea how she's wearing different colored clothes in these 2 pictures, so who knows, maybe I've had my first real glitch. This is a super minor glitch, but it's things of this nature that just don't make any sense at all. If you actually believe what these people have written, then it really does start to make you wonder, are we truly living in the Matrix? Number 2 on this list is creepy Wikipedia. This subreddit is definitely up there as being one of the weirdest online. The whole goal of this subreddit is to find the creepiest and scariest Wikipedia pages in the world and then share them with the world. Wikipedia pages that frankly we probably don't ever need to see. Let's just go down a little rabbit hole here of Wikipedia pages that you might find if you visit this subreddit. Well, let's see. One of the first thing that pops up is this horrifying Tenor Life airport disaster where we learn about how 583 people died in a plane accident where 2 747s crashed into each other in Spain. Or we can learn about how an innocent man, Timothy Evans, was hung after the British police in 1950 completely botched an investigation and convicted the wrong guy. Then literally years later found out that they messed it all up and got the real serial killer. Or if I'm feeling super dark, guys, then maybe I'm interested in this Reddit title, which reads, "The Shijon family was a gang composed of South Korean working class people who literally ate the rich. Their hatred for the rich was so extreme that they would kidnap, assault, and cannibalize them. One of them told reporters that their only regret was not killing more rich people." So yeah, this subreddit is pretty dark. The scariest part about all of this is that these are real events. Wikipedia can't always be trusted for all of the details, but for the most part they're pretty accurate, and the 3 events that I brought up are all real things that did happen at one point or another. This subreddit is basically one of the darkest and scariest places to learn on the internet. If you just want to learn about death, hatred, and atrocities, then this subreddit is for you. Frankly, I'm not that way inclined, and as much as I don't want to be ignorant to what's happening in the planet or what has happened in the past, I'm also not trying to surround my brain with that much darkness and violence. Number 1 on this list is No Sleep. No Sleep is the subreddit everybody thinks about when we're talking about creepy experiences on Reddit, and for good reason. This subreddit is filled with extensive tales of paranormal and creepy experiences people have had. Now I should note that most of the stuff posted on here is fiction, but every now and again you run into what someone claims to be true. Even these fictional stories are super scary though. These tales are typically very long, and therefore I won't be able to read out an entire post during this tiny little entry. However, I will read off the first section of this one story by Feathers and Fire. They write, "I lazily flicked the last watched video away, a cat wearing a helmet fashioned out of a melon, and a live feed takes its place. It's dark, with torches or headlamps making almost a strobing effect in some crusty old building. Ghost hunters or something like that. Not my thing. I raise my finger to scroll again, but at the last second, something catches my eye that stops me dead. The camera pans past a black and white framed photograph on the wall. It's my grandparents on their wedding day. I sit, stock still, watching intently as the camera moves forward. I would recognize that photo anywhere, having examined it countless times as a child visiting their farmhouse. It was my favorite picture out of any hanging on their walls." Now that story, as you can guess, probably doesn't end as a fun and warming tale of this person's grandpa and grandma. It was a very well written post for sure, and gets very dark and scary very soon. If you decide that you want to read the full thing, then just be aware that you may not be getting a ton of sleep tonight.
Number 5. The Walking Dead. My first true tale of phantasmic terror comes to us from Reddit user Jalcott. Answering a question posed in the thread, "Nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's the weirdest and most paranormal thing you've ever experienced?" Hospitals already seem pretty haunted as is, so it's no surprise that there was so many good answers. But Jalcott stood out. Take a listen. "I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early on in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't talk, but there was no medical reasoning as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then. with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the army when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing, and later officially declared dead. However, 10 years later, a 7-foot tall man walked into a Virginia hospital ER in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Deschênes, and I've been dead for 10 years. And according to the Redditor, those were the last words he ever spoke to anyone. He had shown up to the hospital covered in dust and wearing an old uniform that he'd been wearing the night he vanished. His social security had not been used at all, and he had no ID on him whatsoever. However, via fingerprints, they were able to identify him. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever was claiming to be him simply wasn't, and asked to never be contacted again. The nurse went on to add that Marion would pace all day, every day, moving his mouth in a way that looked like he was muttering to himself, but nothing came out when he moved his lips. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he was laughing hysterically, but not so much as a breath could ever be heard. The nurse said she tried talking to him almost daily, and he would appear to listen, but only react by periodically throwing his head back in that laughter mimicking way of his. Various medications and treatment plans were pursued, but nothing ever affected him. Therapy was tried as well, but all that would happen was Marion would just grin and start pacing again. She goes on to say that on her last day, she saw Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing back his head to laugh. She closes by saying all those years she'd wondered, was he a ghost? And all those years later, she still doesn't know. Click through and listen to as many top 5 scary videos as your ears can handle. Moving on. Number 4, the things that go bunk in the night. Now you would never ever believe this, but our next story comes from Reddit as well. A similar thread, a similar question. What's the most paranormal thing you've ever experienced? Lots of good ones to pick from, but this one from Mad Rampager really stood out for me. I used to be in the military. The training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we'd zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? Weird things happen, and I mean human error and all that. Well, then came the instance that freaked everybody out. It was night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us had been drifting off to sleep and we were lying on our beds when suddenly my friend heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So, thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side, and tried to get to sleep. What happened next still chills me to the bone to this day. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him at the other end of the bed saying, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I could have dismissed this as a figment of his imagination, except me and 5 other people around him heard it. Creepier still, there was no one there. And weirdly, it sounded like the voice of a young girl that had said it. For reference, our camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin building. The island had been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone any children. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black, and underneath his pillow was a note. Remember me? Now, as I said, we're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits whatsoever on the island. Our bunks were locked for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea what had happened. We never spoke about it again after that night, and it still chills me every time I think about it.
Coming in at 3, the murder trial. Uploaded to Reddit by Botterwash to r/AskReddit, they responded to the question, what's the scariest story you know that is 100% true? They said, I quote, "This is an incident that happened to me about 10 years ago. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I was driving home from work one night around 9 PM midweek, so the roads were quiet. As I was driving downhill, I heard a sound that was like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I knew, a car goes flying past me going twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old crappy car. Car started to get the speed wobbles, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill, whilst the car spun out and crashed. I stopped my car to make sure whoever was inside was okay. A guy got out of the car and looked over at me, then started moving extremely quickly towards me. I don't know why, but I hit my eternal locks on the car, which was fortunate because no more than 2 seconds later the guy started grabbing at the driver's side door and smashing on my windscreen, with his fists trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off back home. Now you may think the story is scary enough as is, well it gets worse. Let's continue. They go on to say, I decided to swap cars once I got home and drove back to see what was going on. I saw 2 fire trucks and about 4 police close to where the incident happened. When I got back to the crash site, the guy was no longer there, so I decided to head home. The next day at work I was online bored reading the news when I found an article that shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for 1 hour and the police stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous. Turns out the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour drive away, and had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. He got into the taxi and stole it. In the process, he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door and the driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver died from the incident. I called the police and had a detective assigned to me. He fingerprint checked my car and got a statement. I had to testify in the Supreme Court as a key witness in a murder trial. The guy got 30 years and they told me that my testimony was one of the main factors in convicting him. Whoa, how terrifying is that? Remember, always lock your doors, you never know who you might come across down a quiet road. Coming in at 2, Grandma's light is always on. Uploaded to r/nosleep by Saint Entropy, they said, I quote, in one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was always never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tussle my hair and probably change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room. A plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. She gathered me up in her arms and begged for forgiveness. She then finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. She ended up asking grandpa for help. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment. I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching continued, constantly jerking me from the edge of sleep. I threw the blankets off and stormed out into the hall. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house and I moved confidently through it. I was furious at having been woken and my anger was ill prepared for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor where the walls met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, my hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flailed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out one evening, I began changing it every week just as Grandma had. Eventually I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation on the lamp. The light continued to burn and I lived my life happily enough. Whew, this one truly shook me. There's something about the supernatural that I just don't want to mess with. Keep those lamps turned on, folks.
Kicking off at number 5, the recurring dream. And this story from Reddit user Just Another Gamer is a visceral and horrifying reminder that lingering in the deep recesses of the human mind are some truly perplexing chemical reactions that we can't even begin to comprehend. Have you ever had a recurring dream? Ever thought, what the hell is this all about? What does it mean? Wow, yeah, this person is still asking the same question. As the story goes, Just Another Gamer is an avid cave diver, and since about the age of 6, they explored the unknown caverns across Florida. When they were around 7 or 8 years old, they started to have a strange recurring dream. In the dream, they were exploring a cave and made their way through a little hole in the bottom. Inside was a 10 to 15 foot long corridor a few feet in height and a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone had ripped it off and tossed it inside. As they'd make their way through the corridor, it started descending, quickly opening into a large vertical chamber with a path leading down in a corkscrew pan. Then things would get blurry, but they'd remember the image of trash scattered scattered around the walls, things writhing in the distance, strange things, animals and corpses maybe. Amidst them, they'd see their own family, each one of them being tortured and killed, but in the dream, all they could do was scream. Our narrator had this dream for years and years, always the same thing, until 7 or 8 years later, when they were around 15, they went on a caving trip with their father, a place called Dog Drop out in the Tampa Bay area. While when they were descending on a 30-foot rappel, they felt a strange, familiar feeling. When they reached the bottom and looked up, they saw the exact same corridor from their dream. The same strange clutters of trash against the wall, the same red stop sign. Instantly, they were hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and primal fear, and they froze. All they could do is scream to leave, and eventually their father paid attention to them and packed up their things to leave. Whatever was lurking down there, our narrator knew that it wasn't good. They'd seen it before, deep in the recesses of their own memory, and thankfully, they never found out. Coming in at number 4, The Boat Mechanic. And this short and sweet story comes from Two Otters in a Coat, which is a fantastic name, may I add, telling the real life tale about a guy that they knew who made their living working as a boat mechanic. Now, random acts of violence are a different kind of fear, but this one takes it to a whole new level. As the story goes, one Saturday their friend, the boat mechanic, was working alone in their workshop, making some final repairs to a boat that had been brought in. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the mechanic wakes up and he's on the ground. Now, he knew that there was water beneath him just before he's working on a boat, so he assumed that he'd been electrocuted and the shock had knocked him away unconsciously. The strangest part is that he could vaguely sense someone behind him, so he started yelling for help, letting them know that he'd been electrocuted. Whoever was behind him turned and left without a word. He keeps screaming for help until eventually a neighbouring business heard his pleas and came to his aid. Later on though, once he'd been seen by the nearby hospital, he discovered from the police that he wasn't electrocuted at all. According to the police, someone had entered his workshop while he was working and hit him on the back of the head with a mallet from his own toolbox, and nothing was stolen from the shop. Now, this person was never caught and CCTV wasn't clear enough to identify the perp, but as it seems they were walking by and spontaneously decided to knock him out, potentially with the intention of killing him, for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Now that's terrifying.
Coming in at number 3, we've got r/unresolved mysteries. So less mystical and more mystery this time. This subreddit is dedicated to all sorts of unsolved disappearances, unexplainable crimes, unbelievable happenings, etc. If you've ever watched a true crime documentary with a bunch of loose ends or read up on the many cold cases that are out there getting colder by the day, you'll know what this is all about. People leaving home and never coming back after being sighted outside a sketchy gas station. Families going on vacation and remaining away. Updates on famous criminals who have never been caught, the whole shebang. And while a great deal of the mysteries involve missing people and conspiracies related to the functioning of well-moneyed celebrities, there are also some mysteries that are just plain strange. Prisoners who refuse to disclose their identity to anyone, remaining 100% anonymous. Investigations into the glitter industry, trying to figure out why Corbin Blue's Wikipedia page is so well translated compared to other more bankable stars. A thread of Redditors who vanished after asking questions that may have hit a little too close to home. That last one is particularly worrisome, especially if you're interested in stuff like this. Speculation is encouraged and folks should be ready to bring in evidence and research if they want to push their narrative. It's stuff like this that opens up whole worlds that you may have never known about, and maybe after falling down the rabbit hole, wish you avoided. I think the scariest thing about Unresolved Mysteries, though, is the large number of amateur podcasts it inspires. Coming in at number 2, we've got r/Let's Not Meet. Have you ever read the missed connections section of any publication? How many of those do you think ended well? And how many were posted by a creepy guy who thought he was getting somewhere before whoever he was pursuing ditched? Sometimes you might get a ghost world scenario, but how well did that work out for everyone? Not great. r/Let's Not Meet is based on the concept of another similar subreddit called r/Let's Meet. Basically a giant online classified ad board where folks who are really into an interaction with an individual can try their hand at meeting a second time. Sometimes it's cute, sometimes it's desperate, and often it can get a little weird. The weirdest of the weird might make the leap into the dark side and end up on Let's Not Meet. This is the place to post tales of your creepiest real-life encounters with other people. Let's face it, people are weird and bad. Not always, but everyone's got a story about a person they hope they never see again. Whether it's a bad time at a party or a first date gone terribly wrong, the world is full of freaks and creeps who don't seem to understand how socialization works. Stalkers, peeping toms, and overly aggressive barflies all find their homes here. And what makes it extra disturbing is the fact that people are told not to exaggerate. This is not a place to hone your story writing craft. Instead, it's a place to recount actual events as they happened, which, when you think about it, is much creepier than any scary story. Some of the most haunting stories involve people coming within inches of death. I've seen more than one post about someone being somewhere moments before disaster, running into killers moments before they take down their victim, seeing kidnappers and sexual predators scoping out targets, human traffickers canvassing for their next score. It's terrifying to consider how close we may all be to disaster when out and about. And the tales from Let's Not Meet are a chilling reminder. And finally, at number 1, we've got r/50/50. Heaven or hell, what's it gonna be? 50/50 is basically a long list of high-stakes coin flips. Guess correctly and you're no worse off. Guess wrong and you could be psychologically scarred forever. You're risking your sanity for fun. Each post presents you with 2 options, something nice and harmless or something NSFW or NSFL. I didn't even realize there were tags for things not safe for life. Thank goodness though. Because some of the options on 50/50 are so gross, so repulsive, that seeing them could cause permanent damage to a person's psyche. Secondary trauma is real, and if you're not ready, you could be having nightmares for years. Risking it all and running through a few of the posts became a popular pastime and even launched some content creators into the spotlight. Infamy is just as good as fame, right? Let's just take a look at some of the options you have while browsing 50/50, and you let me know whether you'd be willing to take that bet. Men getting eaten alive by shark versus men dancing with shark. A beautiful neighborhood versus man gets electrocuted until his head falls off the side of the roof. A Bob Ross painting versus a decomposing corpse. Wizard spider with his magic hat and mighty staff versus horribly infected spider bite. Honestly, the risk versus reward factor isn't enough for me. I feel like the only reward is the relief of not being exposed to something disturbing, but hey, some people live for the thrill, right?
Coming in at number 5, bug-eyed. We love a good pun from time to time, but this one might just stick with me for the rest of my life. As a person who's worked at swimming pools and summer camps, I've seen all sorts of different stuff get into people's eyes, from sticks, rocks, chlorinated water, bird droppings, and of course, bugs. Hell, I had a gnat fly into my eye while I was biking just last week. But these are all things that can be removed relatively easily if you're careful. They're not trying to make a home in your ocular orb. This story from Reddit user Oscar Devine makes me want to scream, and you're about to find out why. It goes like this. I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid 2 other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down, you know, the gross trick that some kids do with their upper eyelids. It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick, gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and I saw it move. This wasn't an abscess, it was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos for this case for those interested. I mean, I for one am not interested. Walking around with a larva in your eyelid for weeks and not bothering to figure out what it actually was? What if it was like wriggling around in there? What if it decided to start crawling around and looking for food? This is the kind of body horror I would expect in a movie, not real life. Although, what is real life if not horror? Let's keep moving. Coming in at number 4, we've got some unwelcome tenants. This is a personal fear of mine played out right before someone's very eyes. The idea of a silent, sneaky, and altogether uninvited individual deciding that the nooks and crannies of my home are free real estate just drives me nuts. And the worst bit is you're living in blissful ignorance of this until something finally sticks out and other patterns reveal themselves. Those bumps in the night? That wasn't the house settling or whatever other explanation your grandmother might have given you. That was a squatter moving around in the dark. All that food seemingly going missing. It sure wasn't partially forgotten midnight snacks or your friends being greedy, if you know what I'm saying. Those times the motion sensing lights went off in the middle of the night. Not mice, raccoons, or squirrels. Boy, oh boy. User IEAMS85 told their tale in a thread about this particular occurrence. For about a year I lived in a house with 4 housemates. We had a pretty big backyard with a garage and a tool shed that we never used, ever. We also had motion detector lights. 2 of my housemates were very superstitious and believed in ghosts and spirits and such. They also liked to get high on different substances. The lights in our backyard would go off randomly. I assumed it was animals, my housemates were sure it was a ghost. One of them told us she'd seen a man ghost looking through our window when she was high on shrooms. They thought it was scary, I thought nothing of it because, well, yeah. A few nights later, drunk me thought I saw a man through the mesh door to the backyard. I just thought my mind was playing tricks on me because my housemates kept talking about the ghost. Eventually I moved out to go back to my home country, and about 6 months after that I FaceTimed with one of the housemates. Turns out we hadn't seen a ghost. A homeless man had been living in our tool shed for God knows how long. Gave me the creeps for sure. All this happening pre-pandemic is horrific, right? But imagine it happening now. You're always home, and they have smaller windows to get out of their hiding spot. What if somebody died while in your home because they couldn't get enough food or couldn't get outside and you didn't even know until you smelled something funny? That's not an experience I ever want to have.
Number 3, hit and run again. In August of 2018, a woman went out for a bike ride and tragically was struck fatally during a hit and run accident. There was nothing to tie a perpetrator to the scene, no cameras, no footage, no security footage. The only evidence that the police had found was a small black fragment of the vehicle that had struck the bicycle, but it looked indescribable. Not knowing what else to do, Washington State troopers tweeted out a picture of the fragment in a desperate attempt that maybe the internet's collective hive mind might be able to help them identify anything since, well, they were plumb out of ideas. The post eventually made its way to Reddit, posting to r/whatisthisthing, and we know from a couple minutes earlier in this video that r/whatisthisthing is really good at identifying random car parts left behind at the scenes of hit and runs. Well, lo and behold, the Reddit intelligence once again took care of the impossible, and within a while, the unlikely hero named Jess Nuts posted that it was part of a headlamp of an '88 Chevy Silverado. The Redditor clarified that he was a Maryland state inspector for years, and part of each of his inspection process was a mandatory headlamp adjustment. So he explained that he has seen a lot of headlamps in his time and immediately recognized what part of the car it should have belonged to. With this tip in hand, it was only a few days later, on August 14th, 2018, where the state troopers tweeted out that they were able to make an arrest after Reddit users identified the broken car part, leading them to the driver, who was swiftly apprehended. The driver had been driving very tired, allegedly, and didn't look back after he'd hit someone because he didn't want to see a body. Not really a great excuse. He was sentenced to 4 years. It may not provide all the closure for the family, but thanks to the help of some Reddit detectives, the case was able to be closed and some justice was able to be served. Number 2, Jane Doe. In 2014, Reddit user Call Me Ice shared a story about an unidentified set of bones lying in a cemetery in Strongsville, Ohio. The user was researching another cold case at the time, amusingly, and was searching for genealogy records and came across the unidentified skeleton and became very intrigued by the mystery. Why was there never an effort in over 40 years to make an identification as to who these bones belong to? Wishing to right a wrong, Call Me Ice posted to r/unresolved mysteries in the hopes of getting some resolved mysteries. The Strongsville Jane Doe, as she was known, was first found in 1975 by 3 boys who were exploring a nearby forest. They found a skeleton lying on a sandbar, mostly intact, but missing some of its jaw. Naturally, the bones were reported, and it was thought to belong to a woman estimated aged 18 to 25, who had suffered a fatal gunshot approximately 5 months before being discovered. Detectives at the time checked her across several missing women cases, but were unable to make any connections or draw up any significant evidence, and the trail went completely cold for decades. Until 2014, when Call Me Ice started to look into it. Call Me Ice got in touch with the cemetery and managed to get access to the original autopsy files and a photo of the skull. She sent it over to a digital reconstruction artist, who then made up a mock-up. Now, nothing too much happened for a while, until in 2016, the forensic artist who had done the reconstruction came across a listing on the NamUs website, that's the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, of a woman named Linda Pagano, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances around 1974. She'd come home from a concert and gotten into an argument with her stepfather and supposedly left to go visit her mother, where she was never seen again after. The forensic artist then contacted the medical examiner's office and pulled Linda's dental records, and wouldn't you know it, she matched the Strongsville Jane Doe to Linda Pagano. Although the identity of the attacker was never found, the family was able to find the smallest closure in finally knowing what happened to Linda Pagano, and it never would have happened without a Redditor bringing it back up. Number 1. The Grateful Doe. One of the more notable examples of Reddit solving a cold case was a 20-year mystery as to identify the body recovered from a car crash that was too damaged to be identified. In 1995, a Volkswagen van was found crashed into the trees off of a highway in Virginia. The driver was able to be identified, but his passenger unfortunately wasn't. A pair of Grateful Dead tickets in his pocket led to him being dubbed the Grateful Doe as a pseudonym. For 20 tragic years, the man was never identified, and the case was completely cold, with nary so much as a link. Until a Redditor caught wind of the case and was intrigued by it and opened it back up herself. The user then made a subreddit specifically for this case called r/Grateful Doe, and suddenly there was all this renewed interest from the greater collective of people working pro bono to try and find any connections they could. Digital reconstructions of the face, composite sketches, all this. Eventually, this caught the attention of someone who was sent an image of one of the composite sketches and said that it looked identical to his old roommate. After getting in contact with the roommate, he pointed the subreddit into the right direction, saying that the Grateful Doe's name, he thought, was Jason Callahan. Reddit then tracked down Shannon Callahan, Jason's half-sister, who upon seeing the composite sketch was moved and offered to take a DNA test. The DNA test confirmed everyone's hypothesis, and after 2 decades, an ice-cold case with absolutely no leads was able to be closed, and Jason's family finally got a little bit of relief to know what happened to their missing relative. The subreddit Grateful Doe is still active and now serves as a hub for several other cold missing cases, with others frequently being solved every day.
Number 5 on this list is Unresolved Mysteries. Unresolved Mysteries is a subreddit that is exactly what you'd expect based on the name, a bunch of creepy and scary mysteries that have never been fully resolved. Now, I've always inherently understood that law enforcement isn't perfect and that things fly under the radar that we don't know about and might not ever find out. Criminals get free and crimes remain unsolved for years, and that's just something that we sort of need to accept. However, looking at this subreddit just makes you understand how many crimes actually go unsolved, and the number, it's truly unsettling. So many of these posts are of people being murdered, disappearing, things being stolen, criminals breaking out of jail, all of these unlawful actions that have just never been solved. Like, I guess I'm okay with a few crimes not getting solved, but this is actually crazy, guys. Now, granted, there are some things on here that are just kind of cool mysteries, like artifacts that have gone missing and stuff of that nature. But most of the posts here are super dark and really make you question the law enforcement that we have in place right now. Just scrolling down through this subreddit, here are some of the topics that I'm talking about. We have assassination, then we have skeletal remains getting found, then we have a Jane Doe being found, then it's a disappearance, then it's 6 unresolved murders. Like, this is some seriously dark stuff, guys. Honestly, I'm not praying before I read this subreddit, I'm just praying in general that law enforcement can start solving some of these things. Number 4 on this list is 2-sentence horror. 2-sentence horror is a subreddit for those of us with particularly short attention spans. Considering I fall into that audience, this subreddit really spoke to me. The rule here is pretty simple: give a horror story in 2 sentences. Sounds impossible, right? Well, you'd be surprised how scary some things can be in just 2 sentences. Let's read off a couple. List Dexit12345 writes, "For 3 weeks I was trapped in that cave, forced to eat my friend in order to survive and see the sun just one more time. As I looked at the sky, there was a searing pain and then a darkness I would never escape from." Shouts from both sides says, "I heard a loud crunch as the dentist was performing my clean. He started screaming at whatever had hatched in my mouth, lashed out at him." Puzzleheaded by 9973 says, "You said I want a lifetime supply of chocolate. This is only 1 chocolate bar." I said to the person running the contest, "I meant your lifetime," he said, pulling a gun out of his jacket. So yeah, that's the type of stuff that we're dealing with on this subreddit. Out of all the ones on this list, I find this one to be the least scary and kind of the most entertaining. If I had to recommend you check out any of them, then this would probably probably be my subreddit of choice.
In at number 3 we have 11BX1371. In early 2015 a dark and mysterious video popped up on YouTube, and a Swedish tech blog that created a web mystery and Reddit users wanted to solve this odd discovery. This video was in black and white and 2 minutes in length. It depicts a person wearing what appears to be a plague doctor costume, walking and standing around an abandoned building with a forest visible through the former windows opening in the wall behind it. This creepy video was also accompanied by a soundtrack of loud bustling noise, and the masked figure holds up a hand with an irregularly blinking light. The film did not have any credits or any claims to ownership, and also contained many commonly used ciphers and encryption messages found hidden in the video and its sound spectrogram, as well as images of tortured and mutilated people. This creepy video soon went viral, and Reddit users started to try and figure out more about this mysterious video. Most of the messages were decoded by participants in an ongoing Reddit thread, and the images sourced to notable murder investigations such as the Boston Strangler. These videos have been interpreted as implying a threat of bioterrorism against the United States, although it has also been speculated that the video is in reality a prank, a viral marketing stunt for an upcoming film or video game, or even a student film. Many were trying to find the origin and creator of this odd film, and it was found that John Erik Kreibleichler, the founding editor of the Swedish tech blog Gadget ZZ, received a DVD in the mail of this mysterious video on it, and when he couldn't decode the video, he posted it in his blog. John Erik wasn't the first to make this video public. Internet sleuths soon found a user account identified as AETBK, who had posted it to YouTube. The account only posts on the site. When this video gained traction, this AETBK was identified as Daniel from Spain, and he claims that he was sent this video from a woman he didn't know, who told him that she had found it on a park bench. Another earlier version of the video was found posted on the paranormal website 4chan. 3 months after it was released and the most of the hype died down, a guy named Parker Warner Wright spoke to the Daily Dot claiming how he was the guy who created the video. The Daily Dot published an interview with Wright. He told reporter Mike Weiner that he was a US citizen who lives in Poland, and that the videos were meant as an art project. After finishing the video in May 2015, he had left 3 copies, 2 on discs in a subway and park in Poland, and the last one posted to 4chan. Without these curious Reddit users, this mystery may have stayed unsolved, and the true origin of the video would never have been known. In at number 2 we have WebDriver Torso. In 2014, online sleuths noticed that a YouTube account called WebDriver Torso was uploading with insane regularity, yet none of the videos seemed to make sense. The videos were varied in lengths and consisted with a lot of beeping. Theories about the channel's purpose varied wildly, with some even speculating that it was a government sending encrypted messages for the sake of espionage. However, a now deleted Reddit account had gotten to the bottom of the mystery, linking the channel to YouTube's parent company Google. Google actually eventually responded to the mounting speculation surrounding WebDriver Torso, explaining that the videos were used to determine to what extent the technical quality of videos had suffered when they were uploaded to the site, when compared to the originals. Created by Google on March 7, 2013, the channel began uploading videos in September of the same year, consisting of simple slides accompanied by beeps. It was brought to public attention in 2014, when it became a source of speculation for viewers who discovered it and noted 3 atypical videos featuring jokes, and that's when Reddit came across this and started trying to crack the case. The channel stopped posting videos at its same rate after 624,774 videos as of May 2017. The channel posted a few more videos in May, August and October 2018, followed by uploads in July and October 2019. The channel once again posted a video on November 22nd, 2021. Also, if you search WebDriver Torso into Google, the logo will begin behaving in an odd and mysterious shape-shifting manner. Now that the Reddit thread is deleted, leaves mystery in what Google was really trying to do with these videos, or if there really is a true sinister reason for these videos. In at number 1 we have the identity of the Strongsville skeleton. Back in February of 1975, 3 boys exploring the local woods in Strongsville, Ohio came across a skeleton and immediately contacted local authorities. The police were only able to determine that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head and that the body belonged to a white woman around the age of 20, but nothing more was known about this Jane Doe. After the case went cold in 2015, an amateur genealogy researcher was searching through cemetery records in Cleveland when she discovered a listing for unknown white female bones. The woman named Christina Skates began investigating the case herself and uploaded her findings to r/Unsolved Mysteries and another online forum called Web Sleuths. From there, an artist named Carl Koppelman created a reconstruction of what the deceased woman may have looked like based based on images he had seen of the skull. The reconstruction started gaining traction, and similarities were made between the Strongsville Jane Doe and a local Ohio woman named Lena Pagano by Carl and law enforcement, which led to her identification in 2018. DNA testing would confirm that the unidentified remains were in fact those of Linda. Linda Pagano was a woman from Akron, Ohio, who had been reported missing in 1974. She had an argument with her stepfather and left home, never to be seen again. Thanks to Reddit and web sleuths, this case was solved and the Jane Doe was finally identified, and the case could finally be closed after more than 40 years.
Number 3. Old friends. Our next story is from a Reddit thread asking, "What's your ghost story?" And I gotta point this one out just because it was too funny, but the original poster included the title in brackets, "Serious?" to deter any would-be paranormal pranksters. Just serious ghost stories, please. Luckily, Redditors obliged. User Barbed Cats shared this terrifying tale. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. Up in the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone else stranded, and it would turn out that the guy standing there was somebody I'd actually been to school with, my old friend Jim. Jim gets in the car and we start talking, catching up. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe just a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the reunion with me and have a drink. He says no, just take me back home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the part of town that really was just the outskirts, up by the fairground and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that must be where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, "Just drop me off here. It was nice to see you again," and he walked off into the night. So I went to the high school reunion, met up with some old classmates, and we start to talk. Now please understand me here. I am stone cold sober, nor do I ever take anything harder than soda. Tired after a 13-hour flight, but I was completely sober. As we were talking about who was showing up and who wasn't, I mentioned to my old classmate that I just picked Jim up a few miles off east of town and had dropped him up by the fairgrounds. Now for some reason everyone got really quiet. Even the guy belting out karaoke stopped, and my cousin went white as a shirt. Barb. Jim died 8 years ago. Rolled his car. I start to feel really dizzy, and I go out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I'm going crazy. And there on the seat was a newspaper printed 8 years ago containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and again I take it out to stare at it, and I still wonder just what the hell happened that night. Number 2. Ghost on the Line. The next story comes to us from a thread asking law enforcement officers of Reddit, what is the creepiest call that you've ever been on? We got a very creepy answer from user Smokey Bonaparte sharing this creepy little tale. The Redditor writes, 911 dispatcher calling in. We received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her before and her husband in the past, so I recognized the voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulances advised that they had a 15-minute ETA as she was in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her just about her husband and how she was doing, and just making pretty standard small talk with her. The ambulance arrives and I let them know that she is in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to her door to go answer the door, and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Oh, that's pretty normal, right? Well, here's where it gets very weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute after, and they say that no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff in the area pulling on scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address, and he's breaching the door to make access to the PT. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios to ask me who called. I tell them it was the elderly woman who lived on residence. He tells me he's going to call this in and he needs to speak with my shift supervisor. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the same information I relayed, that it was all correct, and asks what's going on. Apparently the old woman had been dead for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back for them and confirmed it was the old woman who called. The ambulance transferred to the hospital and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. But I took a call from a ghost that day. Number 1. Uninvited guest. Closing off our list is this story which chilled my spine like Sub-Zero. Coming to us from user Paranormal, which, hey, by the way, love the pun. It was from an Ask Reddit thread asking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Lots and lots and lots of good ones, but this one took the cake. So lend an ear. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room and on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room that were fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it might just be something off the TV screen, and then one evening I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, and I looked in the mirror and saw a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. I turned to look at the mirror again and he was gone. I felt more than a little spooked. Another time we were just sitting in the living room and we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running across upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work leaving us all alone. Around that time I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 posters slowly get peeled off the wall. No, it wasn't just them falling and dragging each other down. It looked as if someone was carefully unsticking the tape and removing them. The next morning my friend put them back up saying, well, I need to get some better tape. She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to keep living there anymore. We'd never really talked about anything that had happened in that house, as if talking about it might actually make it worse. But after she moved, I finally confronted her and said it. I said, dude, your house was haunted. I hope you knew that. She replied, yeah, we knew it was. Some guy and his granddaughter used to live there, but he took her life and then took his own. So it was probably them or something. I never told you because I didn't want to scare you. Later, she would dig out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the crime. The picture that went with the article was the exact man I saw all those years ago. Okay, I gotta start looking at some of the cute cat picture subreddits, or maybe ones with like little monkeys going on adventures after that. Need to clear myself out.
Coming in at 5, the Tinder date. Uploaded to r/NoSleep by Small Dog on Desk, great name. They explain their strange Tinder date that may have led to a stalking. I quote, I think my Tinder date is stalking me. I swear, I don't know what to do because I can't prove it. I can smell him in my home. The putrid stench of grease and third world sewers, mixed with body odor. My apartment has absolutely reeked for days. I haven't gone in except to pick up clean clothes and drop off old ones. I first noticed the smell when I came back from our date, alone. The smell was faint, barely there. For a moment I thought it was my asthma of garbage coming from the open bathroom window. When I closed it, the city scum stuck to my skin. Like the rest of my life, the date had gone just wrong. Gerald, he was strange, he looked like his pictures except that Gerald was greasy. No, he was certifiably oily. His hair looked like it was smeared with a slick, almost dripping pomade, and his skin had a suspicious rainbow sheen, like oil on water. His voice matched the rest of him, sleazy, oozing, cystic. I was instantly turned off. Embarrassingly, I was on Tinder because I had no friends. I can see why, judge much. I had just moved to a middle-sized industrial city in Southeast Asia for my company's 6-month overseas industrial attachment. My colleagues were all middle-aged, and I was absolutely craving for some under-30 interaction. I swiped right on Gerald about 2 weeks ago. An empty profile, but lots of pictures. He seemed normal enough, cute in the tall, lean sort of way. That said, I won't deny that the idea of having a local boy take me around made the idea of 6 months in the middle of basically an industrial nowhere somewhat palatable. When Gerald stood up, he left a slick gloss on the seat. I dropped half of my bill, mumbled something about work, and ran off into the cab that had been waiting for me. I tipped him an extra 20 to wait. I don't remember what was talked about during our date. I do remember seeing him through the window of the restaurant. His eyes were slimy, roving, watching me leave. He texted me in the cab asking for another date. I politely declined, but his replies not so congenial. The smell. It was the smell that made me decide to leave. It was still faint then, just a lingering scent, but it made me nervous, a primal uncomfortable feeling of something that was not quite right. I threw some clothes into my gym duffel, then called a cab to the closest Holiday Inn. That was about half a week ago. The texts had been coming in once every few hours. I ignored them now. Last night I went to my apartment to get more clothes. The smell soaked the front door, spilling into the corridor. I smelled it the moment my lift opened. It grew stronger as I approached the apartment. My doorknob gleamed. It was polished, rubbed raw by scrabbling hands. hands. I didn't need to touch it to know that it would be oily, that it would be putrid. I rushed back to the safety of the hotel, the safety of other people. I sat in the lobby for hours, basking in the fading chatter of tourists, the glow of the ceiling lamps, breathing, just breathing. The desk staff looked at me oddly, but no one said anything. My legs tingled when I stood up. I was exhausted. I staggered. Lobby, lift, corridor, bedroom, bed. I was just sinking into the mattress when I noticed it. The smell of faint, rotting oil. I rubbed the fingers of my right hand together. When did they get covered in grease? Whew. Okay, I'll say that the scariest part of this story initially was the girl's judgment. She tore in and she tore hard. Respect. However, the ending definitely gave me chills. Coming in at 4, the man in the apartment. Posted to r/no sleep by reality subsides, they said, I quote, "There's a tiny man living in my apartment. He roams around when I'm there, moving from place to place, but I can never actually look at him. I'll see him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on a counter, kneeling on the floor, always looking at me, but as soon as my eyes start in his direction, turns out it was just a lamp or a shoe or a cup. He's just always in my peripheral vision. I didn't see him often when I first moved in. I'd occasionally notice a strange shape in the corner, but after looking over, would always pass it off as my imagination. It's my leaning backpack. It's just the garbage can. I'd tell myself that I was just tired or hungry or drunk. I never really thought about it, then I began to see him more and more often. He began to take shape, to be immediately recognizable. What used to be a vague black shape became something with color, definition, depth. What I used to be able to shrug off as nothing became something real, something ominous. He began to have a presence. I'd still look over, always with the same result, always trying to convince myself I was just seeing things. Eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something there, it wasn't my mind. He used to startle me, now he terrifies me. The innocent, silly realization of, oh, I thought that stack of newspapers was a person is gone. Now he's grown an anonymous presence, replaced with a heavy feeling of dread. I've started to see him always. He never leaves, he's always sitting there, in the shadows, in my peripheral vision, watching me. Sometimes I'll try to ignore him for long stretches of time. I won't look over at him. I won't acknowledge him. I'll just pretend I don't see him sitting over there, staring at me. I'll just go on about my business. This is when he began screaming. The first time it happened, I was sitting on my couch watching TV. I could see him in the corner, standing there, staring at me, but I tried to ignore him. I tried to drown him out with the television, turning it up louder and louder so it would capture my attention and make me forget about him. I'd still see he was there, but he'd stay in my periphery. I refused to look at him. I remember watching the show, his presence momentarily forgotten, when suddenly he was right next to me, like he instantaneously leapt forward. He was right next to me. I could feel him staring at me. He screamed, the loudest thing I've ever heard, deafening and mind-consuming. I jumped and reflexively looked over, but it was just my jacket draped on the armrest of the couch, vaguely resembling the shape of a person. Heart pounding, I tried to return to the TV, but I could still see him there, standing in the corner, watching me. Well, this is absolutely terrifying. Tiny man in an apartment. Do you believe it, or is it all in his mind?